So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining. Welcome to the very first AI plus social impact panel that ACM AI is holding. This event was made possible by UCLA ACM AI Outreach and Events Subcommittee. If you're unfamiliar with ACM, it's the largest student-run computer science organization at UCLA. I am your host, Maya Rahman. I'm the events director for ACM AI. And my co-hosts are Matt Ruiz and Peter Flanders, who are officers for ACM AI Outreach and Events. So the intent of this panel is to provide some insight to non-technical applications of AI, or applications that rather are not used for corporate benefit, it's not used for ad revenues, it's not used for Tesla or anything like that. It's used more to benefit others, because AI kind of gets a bad rep in the real world. So we want to kind of dispel some of those myths and rumors by showing you some good applications of it. With that being said, we have some wonderful panelists here today that I hope will give you some insight into how AI can be used for good. First off, we have Jennifer LaPlante, who runs an organization called Deep Sense, which aims to help companies use AI to develop the Canadian ocean economy. She's also currently pursuing a master's degree in computing and data analytics, where she is researching how to use artificial intelligence, specifically natural language processing, to identify bias that prevents diversity on company boards, which I think is super cool. And if you're unfamiliar with the term, natural language processing is a field subset of AI that uses artificial intelligence to recognize and process language, like with Alexa or Siri. Next, we have Ryan McCarl, who is a fellow in artificial intelligence law and policy at the UCLA Law School, and he's studying how AI can be applied in the legal profession, also using natural language processing and how it can extract information from texts. Third, we have Dr. Rizwan Malik, who is a consultant radiologist from the UK. It's actually 10 p.m. his time, so we're really grateful that he's here, who worked on implementing the use of artificial intelligence at the hospital he works at, a use that grew exponentially more important in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic. And outside of this, he continues his work as a radiologist, as well as provides consulting services to health and IT companies around innovation and product management. Then we have Shweta Khushu, who is a senior engineer and growth lead of the AI division of SkySpecs, which is a company that uses technology to solve problems in the renewable energy sector. Her work focuses on the computer vision space, and if you're unfamiliar with that term, computer vision is basically using AI to kind of identify and process images. In her free time, she is training in Indian classical music, and she likes to bake and spend time with her cat Oliver. So people in computer science still have free time, don't worry. And then we also have Sweta Priyadarshi. So we have two Shwetas, Shweta K and Shweta P. So Shweta P is a master's and soon to be PhD student, congratulations, at Carnegie Mellon University. Her AI research has focused on many fields, from solar energy to self-driving cars to healthcare, so kind of like the whole field of what we aim to cover during this panel. She is currently working at Alpex Labs at Carnegie Mellon and will be starting her thesis in the fall on the development of AI in healthcare. In her free time, she likes to paint, dance, and Netflix and chill. So we're gonna start off, now that you've kind of gotten an introduction to our panelists, we're gonna start off with the first question. Can you guys give us an introduction to some of the work that you're doing right now? And we can start off with, how about Ryan?
Sure, thank you for putting this together. So I'm interested in how AI is being applied in the legal profession and in law generally. And there's a lot of different areas within that. There's information retrieval for legal research. There's data and predictive analytics, including things like predictive policing and predicting reoffending rates. There's expert systems for solving domain-specific problems. My favorite example of which is TurboTax to help people navigate the tax code. There's decision-making algorithms to help judges and other decision makers make decisions about things like asylum, qualification for benefits, parole, and so on. And some researchers are working on variations of automatic legal reasoning with the idea of at least partially supplementing or replacing the work that judges do. So my particular research focuses, like Maya said, on natural language processing. A lot of what lawyers do is they have to sift through reams and reams of paper, especially judicial opinions. And as a sort of prerequisite for AI helping with that, AI has to be able to understand to some degree the text that you feed into it. And by understand, I mean it needs to be able to take that text and do something useful with it, gather information from it, and potentially use it in some way. And so the particular research I do is I'm trying to develop a machine learning classifier which will identify why one judicial opinion is citing another. So, for example, is it citing it to distinguish it? Is it citing it in support of a statement of the law? And is it discussing it based on its facts, and so on? This is designed to be eventually be a tool that lawyers could use to help with their legal research. But more generally, it's an attempt to show that using machine learning techniques, we can delegate some of the reading process that lawyers use in practice to a machine.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
I guess now, Rizwan, if you could talk about your work.
Sure. So if any of you have been following AI in the social media domain for the past 45 years, you'll realize that I've been put out of a job because artificial intelligence made radiologists obsolete. Now, fortunately for me, no one told my employer, which is why I'm still going into work and they're still paying me, which is always quite useful. But that pretty much sets the framework, really, of why I became increasingly bemused, really, by all the hype that was generated by AI capabilities. And they really haven't been backed up by much substance over the past years. So I was really wanting to explore this further. And that's where my interest was born, really, to try and find this Goldilocks zone between what AI can actually do versus what it might potentially do and what real value it could provide in the future to a patient's imaging journey. In particular, imaging is obviously my main interest as a radiologist, but more broadly to healthcare in an effective and safe manner. So while I was exploring this over the past year or so, again, in the healthcare space, predominantly radiology was where it was focused. It was all image-based. Everyone thought it was fairly straightforward. You just throw tons of image data into these algorithms, they crunch them, and it's all easy, right? What we do is all pattern recognition. Any old machine can do it. But then COVID struck, and what we all witnessed, and what we unfortunately still continue to witness, both first and second hand, are the devastating effects this has had on the healthcare system, not only to patients, but also to healthcare workers. So what we did was we wanted to learn these lessons and try and get a little bit ahead of it, to consider what we could do to use applications to try and mitigate some of these problems that we've seen, particularly in Italy, where, as you saw, ICU units and ventilators were just becoming saturated, to see how we could provide faster clinical decision-making based on x-rays and disease progression in the critical care areas. And what we found was that obviously it's a global pandemic. Everyone quite rightly wanted to do their bit and try and help out. So there was an entire sea of companies that were spun up offering their algorithms to try and help. Now, most of these were never tested in the wild. They were spun up in labs. They seemed like a good idea, tested on 5 or 10, 50 imaged data sets. And trying to get through these, which were effectively marketing ploys. We've done this, why don't you use it? And effectively by using it, what you're doing is testing it out for us. There was some companies who are more mature, they've been in this field for a while, their algorithms were tested over a far longer area. And more importantly, they were actually offering value propositions which were more useful and more aligned in what the kind of problems that we were trying to solve. And when we identify one or two of these, it seemed a natural fit to have that discussion, engage with them, and deploy those, and actually see what we could do from there.
Thank you. It's really important, and we really appreciate that. Next up, I guess, Shweta K.
Hi, Maya. Thank you for having me here. So as you mentioned that I work at SkySpecs, which is a startup based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And a little about SkySpecs is that SkySpecs was founded by a bunch of very talented engineers from the University of Michigan, while some of them were still at school. The company started off in the wind industry in 2014 as a fully automated drone inspection service company. But after a successful run, we grew our services and capabilities to offer full wrap operations and maintenance solutions for the wind assets. The team at SkySpecs believes in using technology to help the green energy initiative so that one day renewable energy can become ubiquitous. For that, we're leveraging power of robotics, AI for inspection services, and also for providing a fast and robust and analytics platform for our solution suite. And I have been a part of SkySpec since 2016 as one of their early employees. And as a senior engineer of the AI team, I've had the privilege on working on some of their core technological efforts, like the data collection process, the data handling tools, and the machine learning solutions. Some of the projects that I worked on at SkySpecs, beyond just the autonomous aerial inspections, are defect identification and classification in the inspection data that we gather. It can take a human up to 20, 30 seconds to find all the defects in a picture, while a machine can do that in a fraction of a second. Some of the other projects that we've been working on are better repair estimates for their wind turbine assets and for estimating the overall health of a wind turbine. So there's a lot of different projects we're doing for the wind industry through SkySpecs, and I'm just very glad to be a part of that.
Thank you. Jennifer, do you want to go next?
Thanks. The organization that I run is called Deep Sense, and it was created by the government of Canada and the province that I live in, Nova Scotia. And as you mentioned, really the big thing is the government's invested heavily in growing our talent for AI in the country, but specifically in the ocean sector, which people don't always necessarily think of. But really it's military and defense with autonomous systems in the ocean, underwater, on land, in the sky. It's shipping and transportation, tourism, a broad range of sectors, and there's a lot around environmental monitoring as well. So my job is to help teach companies what the potential is and then pair them up with students. And the big goal is trying to help companies see how they can use their data differently. Even sometimes it's just processing their data and optimizing their turnaround, removing human error, and speeding things up. And when we find an opportunity for a company, I then pair them up with academic researchers. Sometimes they're masters, PhD, postdocs, and then the academic researchers that oversee those students. And we really try to help the companies advance and create something new. And then at the same time, help students write papers and thesis and other type of work. And with the goal that really we help the companies advance themselves to compete internationally and grow their products and technology pipeline. And at the same time, we create some tech talent in the ocean sector. So it's kind of twofold, where you have companies starting to have some demand for this type of talent. And at the same time, we have our institutions preparing people that can go into that sector and really help grow.
Can you also talk a little bit about the work you're doing with your master's degree?
Absolutely. I mean, we'll get into backgrounds and things like that, but I didn't start out in a CS background, and I've had a lot of social background and business background. And I'm always very interested in organizational leadership, especially at a governance level. And so one thing that I've always been researching has been the presence, or I guess more absence, of overall diversity at the board level. And this could be large publicly traded companies, it can be private companies, or even advisory boards or not-for-profits. And there has been a lot more legislative requirements and some kind of rules that have come into place in various industries and organizations to try to encourage more diversity. But the research that gets completed on it tends to be about, well, what happens when you have more women on your board? Is there a financial return? And it's almost like a challenge to say, does it really matter, and what's the output? So I was trying to look at a couple of different things to research originally for my master's thesis. Was, is there a pathway I could chart? So I could take a pool of women who have certain skills and a pool of women who also have similar skills, and one ended up on a board and one didn't, and try to kind of derive a bit of a decision tree of what happened. To collect all that data was very labor intensive. So instead, I've now turned it to a natural language processing solution to ask and try to find some of those the information of what people think are those criteria, and then drill down trying to get diverse responses from a broad range of people to see if I could better understand some opportunities to really try to encourage greater diversity at the board level.
That's really awesome. And then last but not least, Shweta P.
Thanks, Maya. So I'm currently working on a project that is being funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's a healthcare project, and we aim to predict the biological signals like the pulse rate or the respiration and other vital signals just by using the phone cameras. So currently we are working with 3 countries, that India, Peru, and Sierra Leone. And we do the data collection and have come up with a design that can detect the pulse rate just by using your Android or iOS phone. And we also have a web page, videovitals.org, and like there is a demo over there which people can use. But we are still working on the progress of the website and apps. So currently we are also working on detecting other important features like temperature and other information that that could help us in like differentiating between a normal cold and cough and something like COVID-19. So this is the expansion of our project. And right now, like the overall project is just a non-contact measurement of signals that could help the like normal people to self-inspect their health and also protect the health workers who are on the front line at times like this. So yeah, it's mostly focused on the machine vision that captures biological signals just by phone cameras and other cameras.
Awesome. Well, thank you all of you for telling us about it. I think it's really interesting to learn about how AI can be used for so many things other than just plain like theoretical research or for as I said, corporate benefits. So thank you guys so much for being in the fields that you are and doing the work that you do. So now I'm going to pass it off to my co-host, Peter.
Thank you. I was hoping to ask a little from each of you. Could you talk about your educational experiences? And a lot of our audience members are currently in university. So what classes did you take and what were you interested in while you were studying for this? Oh, can we start with Jennifer?
Yeah. I don't have a CS background originally. I started with a BA in sociology and then later on got an MBA. But I had started with one programming class during my undergrad with not a lot of experience and failed miserably. I think I was the only female and it was not very enjoyable and abandoned that for quite some time. But then I realize now as my responsibilities and organizations grew and I spread more into leadership roles in IT and had a real interest and passion and aptitude for it, I realized then I needed to go back and get a master's, which is why I'm just finishing up an MSc, because I realized sometimes you need to have some of those letters and credentials and foundational pieces to kind of have a role and have a bit of a say. The other thing I think that's really key, especially for students, is I've realized 2 things that really came out of my own experience. That I did a BA in sociology, which means I still learned the original statistical concepts. I had to collect data and analyze data. I still started my career originally in market research, so it was full a lot of k-means clustering for customer segmentations. There's still a lot of key concepts and principles that I learned that have easily translated into my role now. And then the other thing was doing an MBA as well, and some of the roles I've had have given me a lot more business acumen and strategic thinking, which is really critical. So if anyone's moving into the world of AI and data science, understanding the business implications and the business impacts is key. And so sometimes I think, I've met a lot of CS students that have a very literal mind and think programming. And sometimes when you're sitting in an organization strategically thinking of a solution for a problem, you need to be a little more creative. So having diverse backgrounds and skills is really important.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. It's really important to tie us back to earth. Ryan McCarl, thank you.
Yes. So after college, I was a high school history teacher, and then I decided to go to law school. So it was after law school, I was clerking for a federal judge, and I decided to teach myself how to code in Python, which is a relatively simple language, and it's also has become the main language for machine learning, at least one of them. And when I became a litigator after clerking, I started an educational technology startup called Word Brewery, which taught languages by matching learners with real sentences from the news based on a prediction of which sentences would be most useful for the learners. So I worked on that for several years. Unfortunately, we had to shut it down due to hosting costs. But that background that I acquired in tech as well as law paved the way for me to get my current position on the faculty at UCLA Law School.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Next, Rizwan.
So thank you. So I don't have a computer science background at all. I always used to consider myself a bit of an amateur geek, tinkering with computers, building them and the like, but clearly in the august company we're in, it's a very low scale. I studied medicine in university and then did subspecialty training in radiology. So my career path has included a number of leadership and governance roles, both clinically and in the technical aspects of radiology, including leading very large procurement for the PACS. That's the software we use in radiology in our region. So what I would suggest is that the experience and due diligence in these roles is what kick-started my belief that there were so many things in this sphere that we could do better. And actually, I completely agree with what Jennifer said earlier as well. We associate artificial intelligence with, sort of nerdy coders, but actually, when we're bringing this into the live, there are so many more aspects that we should bring our experiences to bear. I work with imaging pathways day in, day out. There are people, even if I were to do some coding, there are people who do this day in, day out, who do this much better than I do. So I would suggest I could engage with someone who does that aspect. I engage with proper data scientists who would do that aspect much better than me, and we could work collaborative to actually bring forward to produce outputs which are meaningful to what we're trying to deploy. And that really is where I think my experience came together so that we could use artificial intelligence in radiology in a way that's both meaningful and progressive.
Thank you. That's very relevant to today. Thank you. Next, we see Shweta P.
Thanks, Peter. So actually, I'm a recent bachelor graduate as well. Like I did my bachelor's degree in electrical and electronics engineering from India. And I passed out in 2018 itself. I worked in Amazon for a while, but that time my domain was more on automation and optimization. At the same time, I got interested in machine learning research. So I switched to one of the best research institute in India and worked there for like 8 months or something. And then I applied for higher education in Carnegie Mellon University. Here also, just on joining like in fall 2019, I started research work as well, and I started working on Bossa Nova boards, which is used in Walmart shops and other inventory management. And soon in like last December, I started working on healthcare projects. And on courses, like I have taken a variety of courses ranging from like the basics of deep learning and machine learning to how to scale those for large data set, like those are used for real case scenarios. So it has been like it's a combination of from the beginning to a higher course level.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was good. Next, can we see Shweta K?
Thanks, Peter. So I received my Master of Science degree in ECE from University of Michigan in 2016, and with a specialization in machine learning and image processing. But prior to that, I had received my bachelor degree from VJTI in India in 2014, and my major was electronics engineering, kind of much like Shweta P. And I also did not always start off in the field of AI. In fact, I was on track to make embedded systems and circuiting my major during undergrad. And I was also part of a robotics society where I used to design circuit boards as a part of that team. And I really enjoy doing all of that. However, along the way, I was inspired by this zealous professor who taught signal processing and image processing and made us all of us fall in love with this subject. And I particularly loved working with visuals like images and video, as you get to visually perceive the output of your solution, and that is really satisfying. So this interest later led to my roles at Intel and then at SkySpecs as a computer vision engineer. Moreover, back to undergrad, the same year I did a research project with another professor which involved neural networks, and it was my first encounter with a modern machine learning algorithm, and I was completely sold. The whole idea that learning through data, the mimicking the design of a human brain was like almost like magic to me. And so in my final undergrad year, I decided to pursue a master's degree in the field of computer vision and machine learning, and started my graduate studies at University of Michigan in the fall of that year. And I'd say that because I was not exactly from a computer science background, I did have to learn a lot of these computer science concepts and some programming languages during my degree, while some of the other students had already learned in their undergrad courses. But I think it's never too late to learn. So if for all the students out there, my message is, if you do ever come across a point where you feel like other students have an edge over you, really don't get demoralized. Just pursue what you love, and it all works for the best.
Thank you. It's really exciting to see how you all joined this field so recently. And since it's such a new field, can you talk a little bit about like what would you change with the field of artificial intelligence today? And Shweta, okay, we'll start with you this time.
Oh, surprise. So I think that AI and machine learning has become quite a bit of a buzzword lately, especially neural networks and deep learning. And everyone wants to adopt the AI technology, and sometimes it almost gets flaunted as a marketing gimmick without understanding the core of the technology. And it's easy enough these days to implement an AI machine learning model because of all the libraries that are out there. But what is important is to understand when one needs to apply those techniques. Are we unnecessarily complicating a solution just because we want to apply AI to it? Secondly, the lack of explainability of AI models makes it easy to have misleading results. For example, if an entity shares high performance metrics using an AI model, uh, what was the distribution of the training in the test data set? What was the generalization? Was it more specific, the data set that you were testing on? So questions like that, without explainability or without having a comprehensive testing or auditing of your solution, you may be selling the wrong picture. So, and one such example is, I think you might have all heard of this, the facial recognition system. That there was a study that showed that many of the top facial recognition systems were biased against age and ethnicity and etc. And so you can have, there are moral concerns associated with such solutions. So if AI has to replace human judgments in certain use cases, I think we need to ensure that it is non-discriminatory, ethical, and can be held accountable. So that is what I would want to change with the use of AI today.
Certainly, I agree with a lot of, I think that's very important. Shweta P?
So we all know that artificial intelligence has gone from like a science fiction dream to a critical part of our everyday life. And today, most of the AI work goes towards coming up with the new technologies or papers that are just really state of the art. Like one of our paper in CMU is based on like how can we predict COVID-19 just from the coughing pattern or the voice of the person. So I think like these all things are great, but at the end, these technologies should be reachable to the common people. And being from a developing country, I really believe that research should not be just limited to publishing papers and like starting a whole new domain or just the applications of AI, but it should be made like the as she said, scalable AI, how easily normal people could use it, and how could AI help common people in their day-to-day life. So like I don't think it is a biggest hurdle would be technology wise, but it would be like how it is being used and where it is being used. So I hope that the leadership roles trying to deploy these networks should be aware of the biases and constraints on the neural network that is built, and also on the privacy of data. Like data is a very inevitable part of any deep learning network. So it is essential to ensure that privacy and accountability, and like work on the models that maybe have encrypted data set or something, like coming up with these technologies.
Yeah, thank you. Very good. Rizwan, thank you.
So what I would say from the outset is we could do with less hype and more substance, and a company should spend far less on their marketing budgets and more on their R&D, so that when you hear about artificial intelligence and things like blockchain, you don't automatically have a visceral reaction against them because of what you're used to hearing. And so in the same vein, really, they should stop trying to cut corners and costs in the vital steps, such as things like data labeling, and have more engagement with domain experts, and really engage more widely in the development stages of the applications. At the moment, the general direction of travel, unfortunately, still seems to be, hey, look, we've created this cool AI tool. The underlying use case is less important than the fact that it's AI and it's cool. You ask, what does it do? How's it going to help me? What do you mean, how's it going to help you? It's AI. If you don't understand it, you're not meant to be using it. And you're considered a blocker if you ask all these impertinent questions. So I'd suggest the AI companies need to stop concentrating on being cool and focus more on being useful. And actually, there are just some things which my esteemed colleagues have already mentioned. There were two aspects I wanted to focus on. The one is something Jennifer talked about earlier, which was about the diversity in this sphere. And it isn't just something to tick a box. But I don't know if any of you remember, before the world turned on its axis back in September, there was a bit of a furore where Apple credit cards, and Steve Wozniak identified that his wife had a 10 times lower credit rating on her credit card than he did when they had joint finances. And there was another tech supplier, apologies, I forget his name, who actually had a wife who had a better credit rating, whereas his credit card limit on the Apple card was 20 times higher than his wife's. Around the same time, I think in the US, there was another United Health Groups, which again flagged up that there was some bias against Afro-Caribbean and Black patients compared to the others in terms of the insurance field. So we shouldn't assume that AI is devoid of biases, and someone described quite neatly that actually artificial intelligence is basically a bias enshrined in code. And so having more diversity in the engagement and the workup of these things would absolutely help to identify and iron out some of these issues. The last thing I'll probably say in this regard is what we should look for is to have more transparency in the training, the validation, and in the limitations of what artificial intelligence do. So in a nutshell, openness is what's required to foster confidence in the adoption.
Thank you for continuing and moving past that. Ryan, could you continue with that? Just to remind you, the question was, what would you change in the field of artificial intelligence today? Thank you.
I think
sorry, you are currently muted.
Sorry, who?
Oh, sure thing. Yes, and I saw one of the Zoom bombers is using my name as well. So anyway, so I'm sorry, what was the question? I got a little distracted there.
Thank you. What would you change about the current use of artificial intelligence and the field of AI today?
Great. So I agree with what several of the panelists have said about the need for people to understand it more, understand what it is and how it works, what its limitations are. I think that there are certain basic concepts, such as the difference between narrow AI, which is AI focused on specific tasks, and general AI, which is this idea of artificial intelligence as having human level intelligence that can do anything. I think that's a really important distinction that is rarely made in most media discussions of AI. I think people need to understand that the world we live in is one in which narrow AI is the norm, and that's whenever people are talking about AI in practice, they're talking about narrow AI. But theoretical discussions can move between the two sometimes without distinguishing them. I believe one of the panelists has mentioned explainability as well. This refers to the idea that AI systems should be comprehensible. They should explain how they're reaching the decisions they make. I think this is particularly important in the legal domain because people have when your rights and when your rights are being adjudicated, you have a right to an explanation of why the decision's being made the way it is. That's why we have judicial opinions, for example. And I think it's necessary, especially in the context of criminal defense in the criminal justice system, to have for defense attorneys in particular to have a window into how any system is being used in surveillance or bail decisions, how they work, and how they came to a decision. I think in that context, it's also important to have what they call a human in the loop, meaning there should be a human that signs off on decisions that machines make or help with, or at least a human that you can appeal a machine's decision to. I agree with the several panelists have said that they're concerned about AI being a buzzword, and I think that it's very possible to fake AI and to make it seem as though you're using AI and machine learning when you may just be using ordinary programming techniques that don't improve themselves and that don't use machine learning at all. And I think that it's important for people to become skeptical consumers of AI for that purpose.
Thank you for explaining the relevance and such. That's very important. And Jennifer, thank you.
All right, there we go. You guys are champions because you're champions for doing it. I think maybe, I'm talking today and in the future, but I go back to the diversity issue that we have in leaderships in organizations. And I think, first and foremost, I definitely want to see greater diversity in the CS programs. I think that's the real first step. But the biggest thing is we need to have changes in leadership and organization and greater diversity, because if we don't, then people won't be hired that are more diverse, because research has shown that people tend to hire people who look and think like them. And if you have one group or one AI team or one tech team who is very much the same, it's going to be really hard to have someone new to go in there. So staffing is pretty critical. Going back to the same comments already that have been mentioned, like transparency and accountability. I think if there's not enough leadership diversity, then maybe we won't hold other teams accountable for thinking and being inclusive. And then at all levels, there needs to be greater diversity. So if we don't have diversity at the top, it won't trickle down, and we don't have diversity at the bottom. So we can have all of the students we want graduating from universities and getting trained up. But if they're not getting hired and joining the right teams to ensure that what's being created today is fair and equitable and just, then we're not really any further ahead.
Thank you so much for all those answers. And I'm going to pass on for the next question to Matthew.
Thanks, Peter. Oh, yeah, so for the final question, I'm going to be asking all of you, what hopes do you guys have for the future of AI? Like whether it be specifically in your field or in the general field, what are the kind of things you want to see like changed within the next 10 years, 25 years, or even 50 years? So we'll start with Ryan.
Sure. Well, I've mentioned that I would like to see more education around AI. I think that it should be part of the really somewhere in the K-12 educational curriculum, a basic understanding, very basic non-technical understanding of things like the difference between supervised and unsupervised machine learning, how they work, the fact that people are interacting with recommendation systems all the time when they're using different services, the fact that people are shedding data everywhere they go, and what that data is being used for. I think that those are important things for all of society to understand. Obviously, particularly important for people who are going to become leaders in the policy or technical or educational sectors, but everybody needs to understand them. In terms of AI itself, I think in the field of law, there's hope for it to be used as support for to sort of lighten the cognitive load and the workload of lawyers and judges. I don't think it can replace, I think talk of it replacing lawyers and judges is completely misplaced, but it can be used as a support system. I mentioned TurboTax earlier. That's a good example of how the tax code is mind-numbingly complex. Most lawyers never study tax law, but TurboTax has simplified the process for individual filers to be able to navigate it pretty safely without an account. Another example, there's a startup called Case Text, which you can feed it a legal document such as a motion the other side wrote, and it will use the whole document as a search query to return other documents that are relevant to the document you fed it. I think that's a really useful example of an advance in natural language processing and information retrieval. I would say that the most exciting applications of AI, however, are not necessarily in my field of law, but in the field of some of the other panelists. I'm particularly excited about what I hear about AI's use in the health sector, about issues such as imaging or diagnostic imaging, and measuring drug interactions. I have faith that people are working on the COVID problem using AI, and I think that that's a great tool to have in the toolbox. Same with environmental. I think we have, we're facing obviously environmental catastrophes, slow-moving environmental catastrophe, and any use of AI to more efficiently deploy resources is helpful. Even something as simple as a Wayfinder app like Waze or Google Maps, if it helps reduce traffic overall, or it helps people get to their destination faster, it's a sort of a marginal improvement in society and society's distribution of resources that I think is really helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. Those are all really good points. And I think like increasing like the applications of AI, like you said, all like comes down to the first point you made about like making education for AI like accessible to all. And I think that's something that we're going to see in the next like 20 years. Okay, going on. How about Rizwan? What do you see in the next 10, 15 years of AI?
So if you sort of talk slightly shorter term, hopefully sort of 5-10 years rather than even longer term, I think my first hope is that we can stop treating AI with such mystique and regarding it as some sort of voodoo magic, and instead just look to use it more widely. Initially, what it does best: data analysis, repetitive tasks, some cool stuff like NLP applications to crunch through vast lakes of data we have. And if we go specifically to the realms of healthcare, what this will do is that there basically aren't enough doctors or healthcare professionals of any description anywhere in the world. And by using AI in this field, what this will do, it will liberate some time to allow us to focus on the empathy and human aspects of our roles. So if we can break this hype bubble, which is created around AI, I actually realize that the more boring applications are probably currently the most useful applications of it. Then once you get through that barrier, you can realize that there are far more useful things that you can do with this technology to complement and enhance rather than focusing on this rather tiresome mantra of replacing humans with artificial intelligence. And so broadly speaking, with this approach, what I do hope is that AI companies will make more effort to engage with users, and we can develop a whole range of services in very, very small mundane things through to the big flashy products, and just to make our lives easier and a bit more accountable throughout.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Those are all really good points. Thank you. Okay, going on, Shweta P. You're on mute, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. So I also believe something in the same line as Ryan, that AI is like something like an advanced industrial revolution and everyone should benefit from it. So since it would be replacing the structure of jobs that currently exist, it is suggested that the curriculum of education at each level should be changed to accommodate the advances that are being done in the domain of AI. With this, I would also emphasize on the data privacy. Like I work on a medical domain, so obviously, like we can have much more advances algorithm wise, but data privacy is something that should be made compulsory for all the big tech that exists there, so that no one has to compromise their data privacy. And also, I should in the future, AI should not be resource bound, or like right now, to run very heavy networks, we do need like very high level GPUs. So I believe that gradually it would come down to a lower level and everyone should be able to use it. Yeah, like compressed model that could just operate from your phone or something.
Yeah, thank you very much. Those are two big topics about privacy and making AI faster. Okay, next we'll have Jennifer.
I think everyone's had great points. Some of the things I'd love to see, definitely diversity is going to be first and foremost, just to ensure a long-term application, but the diversity of it too is that the comprehension and understanding for all ages and all skills and backgrounds. So smaller companies can better understand how they can use it so they're not left behind. we have these large organizations who have the R&D budget to go and really investigate these solutions, but they themselves may suddenly lose out on any kind of market opportunity because they aren't able to compete. And then, you know, the whole privacy issue, and you're the customer yourself. I have a teenage son and a younger son, and I want them to really understand the benefits of it, but also the inherent risks associated with it. So when information is pushed to them in their own feeds, they understand that maybe what they're interpreting isn't necessarily the best thing for them, that they kind of have a level of cynicism around what that AI is giving them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, just being aware of AI in general. So I think that's really good. Okay, lastly, we'll go on to Shweta K.
Right, and I think, yeah, everyone had really good points. I totally agree with increasing more responsible use of AI technology. And I think we're at this breakthrough stage with because of so much advancement in computing and the big data, but there are certain implications and impact of AI development that I think are still not very well understood, by which I do not mean like a Skynet type of system taking over the world, but more like the ethical concerns with using a system like a black box. And so exactly like in the face recognition example I mentioned earlier. So, and as Shweta P said earlier, like security and privacy risks should also be well understood and should be mitigated. And I envision that in the future, there will be more regulations and norms regarding this use of AI, both in terms of government-defined regulations and also industrial policies. I also envision there being better interpretability of machine learning models. A lot of companies are already working on this, like to the visualization of the layer learned by the filters at every layer of a neural network. A lot of companies are trying to have that visualization so that you can better understand what your model is learning rather than treating it like a black box. So efforts like that, I think, are going to spring up more in the next few years. And I think recently a cohort of top AI scientists from prominent groups came together and drafted this document called Towards Trustworthy AI Development that emphasizes the need of auditing and explainability of AI solutions. So I feel there are going to be a lot more such efforts that will help streamline the commercial use of AI and make it more trustworthy and dependable for everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I really enjoyed all you guys' responses. I think all your responses like center around the idea of making AI more like less hype and just like making it more like understandable to everybody in the business sector or just all sectors. So I really liked how all your guys' answers revolved around that. Thank you. Okay, so now we're done with the panel questions and we'll be moving on to audience questions. So Peter and I will be alternating between asking the audience questions. And so anyone in the audience, you guys could ask a question via the chat. Then Peter and I will delegate them.
Yeah, before we go on with that, I mean, first of all, really sorry about the Zoom bombing. I should have planned a little bit better and locked the meeting. I know that some people are probably going to leave during the audience questions section, so I'm putting a form for the audience members to fill out with some feedback. Can talk about anything, even the Zoom bombing, just to kind of figure out what we did well, what could have been done better. So I'm putting that in the chat, so please check that out when you have the time. And yeah, just go ahead and ask any questions that you have in the chat, and Peter and Matt will kind of read them out loud to the panelists.
One thing Ryan mentioned earlier, he had some recommendations for books, and so I was going to ask all the panelists if you guys had read any good books recently. They don't need to be AI or machine learning related, but that would be good. Anyone can answer though. Thank you.
I have one. I brought this up, Maya and I chatted not long ago and I brought this one up, but Data Feminism. And it's a great book that talks about just data in general, and the whole concept does touch on AI, but it's more, it's more around the inherent challenges when you go and build models that don't have diverse facial images in your data set, or all these other types of medical research that maybe is only done on one gender, or other inherent challenges with the data that gets collected and you're only collecting it from one biased population. And it's a fantastic book for anyone who's interested in data science, because it kind of is a reminder of what not to do and change your mindset as you are looking at collecting data.
Thank you.
I would suggest the deep learning book by Jan Goodfellow for the starters. Like any starter can go ahead with the deep learning by Jan Goodfellow.
Thank you.
Hi, the two I put in the chat, in case anybody missed it, were I'm currently reading Melanie Mitchell's Artificial Intelligence: A Guide for Thinking Humans, and I really like that. Another one that I've read that if I remember correctly, I liked it, was Garish and Scott's How Smart Machines Think. I like them both because they provide an accessible introduction to the technical side, even if, like me, you didn't get a comp sci degree, you don't know any math. I think that's really helpful. They're also both on Audible.
So if anyone has a sort of healthcare slant, then what I would really recommend would be Eric Toppel's Deep Medicine: How Artificial Intelligence Can Make Healthcare Human Again.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Okay, we have one audience question. I think it applies to all panelists. It's from John. What role do you think the government should have in regulating AI?
That's a very good question. I think there clearly is a role for some governance. We need to have some agreed infrastructure. You need to have agreed standards. It does need to have appropriate regulation frameworks put around it. Very similar to the pharma industry and drugs. You really shouldn't be having algorithms deployed in the wild, particularly when they have interactions with humans in or without healthcare, driving cars, whatever, you name it. And so they must have some agreed minimum standards that they conform to before they should be allowed to be used in the general public domain.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great answer.
I'll jump in.
If anyone else wants to go ahead, you could answer.
Sure, I'll jump in really quickly. I would say that the one issue with regulation, there's a couple issues with it. One is that the government, employees or policymakers or legislators that are coming up with the regulation may not have a fully developed understanding of what AI is and what exactly they're regulating. They may be taking a grab bag of policy proposals written by others who may or may not understand exactly what they're regulating. That's one danger. Another danger is that regulations are generally inherently one size fits all, and we're talking about a explosion of diverse technologies that may not be susceptible to blanket rules. So I think the main one area in which government regulation is definitely desirable is privacy, and protecting people because we have to shed data as we go about our business in day-to-day life, helping make it so that when we do that, we're not sort of unwittingly creating a picture of ourselves that can be traced back to us with sensitive information. I think that's the main one. I think regulation of facial technology and biometric identifiers is really important, but I'm generally wary of broad proposals to regulate AI because I'm afraid that people don't really understand what they're regulating and what the effects are going to be.
Yes, that's one thing which I would say. I think people like the FDA are still making it up as they go along, and so we really shouldn't be treating them as a ground truth for now.
There's caution though, I think too, right? Like if we don't have some kind of oversight, there's massive risk. So you don't want to have a bottleneck, but then you also don't want to allow anyone to do anything that they want. So governments are so slow sometimes to catch up that there's some inherent risk. Like and I realize this isn't quite the same, but use the risks that you have with like drones. When drones suddenly came about and all of a sudden you had drones being flown around places that were unsafe, and it took government forever to put in rules. So governments have to be really careful and pay attention and be proactive. And I'm not sure that's always happening.
I think I agree. I just want to echo all of the sentiments that have already been said, that it is a hard thing to regulate because it's not very well understood. And from what I understand, there are groups within the government which are taking efforts to understand the implications of AI, and but it takes time to implement that. I would envision that in the future, like the aerospace industry has regulations, we probably AI would have regulations of that nature. But then right now it's just such a not well understood field, so we're a little ways from that.
Thanks. We got some questions in the chat. One of them was from Arjun. He says, if I'm interested in applying AI to social justice issues, but I don't know where to get inspiration, where should I start to look?
I'm going to go back to the book that I recommended. The data feminism book is an idea. There's a good source or a good network. I think sometimes people tend to look at AI as purely in the computer science domain when that's not the case whatsoever. You'll find some academics, and I see some comments too about, you know, no master's and no PhD. I just, it's an easy place to go to for published work is really the biggest thing about going to the academic space. But if you look within social science, any type of humanities or social science, you'll still see great prevalence and growing breadth of AI and machine learning. And you'll find some really interesting work that's being done around the inherent risks of AI when it comes to social justice. And it, well, I mean, look at Ryan as an example from a law standpoint too. There's a lot, I don't know if there's one central source, but I think if you started doing some little bit of digging, you might find.
Okay, if none of the panelists are like have any other response to that question, we move on. There's another question from Suraj. Any open data sets that have a lot of potential to be explored?
Well, I think there are many data sets that you could find on Kaggle, and you can use that. Yeah. And there are actually many sites, like there is a Million Song data sets and many other data sets that are publicly available, and you can just use them for exploring.
Yeah, there's some website that, in addition to Kaggle, that just collects open data sets, and I don't know the name of it, but if somebody else might, otherwise you might be able to find it on Google. So there's a ton.
So Google has a data set search engine now, which you can actually just look for data sets. I've added the link on the chat group, so if anyone is interested, please take a look. It's really good.
I suppose the only thing I'd say about data sets is you need to be very careful of what you're doing with them. They're absolutely fine to play around with, but you know, all data sets, when they're collated, will have inherent biases to them. If you're going to train a model on a data set and it's perfect on that data set, remember when it goes out in the wild, we're all different. You know, humans and human interactions are a very variable feast. Don't get lulled into false sense of securities just by using published fixed data sets.
I've got another question. 1 minute. What was one of the biggest challenges you faced in your careers? Just like, I don't know, it probably could be a really big question, but you don't need to speak too long on it.
I'd go back to what I said earlier, really. I think the biggest frustration that I faced really has been the big disconnect between venture capitalists and finances who poured fortunes into getting these solutions up and running, and they want quick returns, whereas actually it's not a sprint race. We're in this for a long haul. You want more of a long distance runner than this. And so what you've got is everything was geared around, all the marketing was geared around very quick returns, all the hyper marketing was flashy. And if I give an example in the medical field, forgive me for sticking to my lane, so to speak, IBM Watson burst on the scene a few years ago as being this panacea for everything and everyone, and then it just didn't stack up anywhere near what it's supposed to do. And so trying to get into the field, you want to be an early adopter. And then you see these things and you become really cautious. You don't want to get stung. You don't want to be that guy or girl who's deployed something which turns out to be junk. And then we've all basically crawled back into our shell. And I think that's something which we're starting to come out of now. And over the past year, we're really starting to see a re-emergence of useful AI, I'd suggest.
Yeah, it's always intimidating to like look at a problem and be afraid to like put a solution, but then have it be a bad solution.
I think for me, it's not a frustration, but it's something that we observe that in AI, or in machine learning, there's no one size fits all, and you just have to be patient, and you have to just realize that your data is going to dictate your solution, and just getting the data to work, I think that is a constant struggle. Yeah, contrary to what sometimes it's marketed as, it's not necessarily just always the algorithm, it's the data that's going to define your solution.
I would say that I'm a big advocate of self-education, and that's how I've gotten into this in the first place. But I do want to acknowledge that, you know, hitting a technical barrier is hard, and persisting in the face of stuff that you don't quite understand is difficult. So it requires kind of a constant pushing, and, you know, personal growth and learning is, you know, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so, you know, sometimes some things may take you years when you assumed it would take you weeks. It may take you a lot longer to fully grasp it. So all you can do is keep pushing.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question from Daniel. His question is, for those of us not seeking a master's or PhD degree, do opportunities still exist in the fields related to AI? And how do you suggest getting involved?
And this is the last question, just to clarify.
So one of the things I think, and maybe my role's a little different, where, I mean, I've been in an organization trying to really spin up the AI capabilities of it, and now I'm on the outside where it's more like a consulting role or conduit and facilitator of initiatives. And as I have conversations with organizations, I think it really depends on where you want to end up. But one of the biggest things that really matters is capability and skill set and examples. So never underestimate the strength of having your Git on your resume and having some great examples of projects you've completed. Like, that's pretty critical, because someone can go and have completed 3 degrees, but if they've only ever done some research in one really small, narrow aspect, and they worked under someone as their supervisor that really led them down a path of something, it doesn't mean they necessarily have all the scope and breadth and capabilities of working in a large organization. I think dabbling in a bunch of different areas and really trying to hone in your skills is important, and you can never underestimate that, depending on where you want to go from a career path. But doing different training, exploring different data sets, understanding how to solve those problems is going to really help run the scope of what you can do.
Right, and I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Please go ahead.
I wanted to I guess reiterate that I don't have any formal background in tech at all, or comp sci at all, and I went to law school and studied social sciences. So it's just a matter of investing in learning, which you can do by yourself. I mean, there's no substitute, obviously, for being a comp sci PhD or undergraduate. I think that's great, but at the same time, there's so much out there, particularly in this field. There's a lot of great courses taught by great professors that if you can find the motivation to work through them, and if you can find the motivation to read some of the books that we're recommending, you'll immediately put yourself in the top 1 percentile of people who understand this material.
To that, I just want to echo what Jennifer and Ryan have already said, that I also recruit for my company for the AI team. And it doesn't matter what degree you have, if you can show your passion through projects or courses or other things that you have done in the field, it will get the attention of the recruiter.
Anyone else would like to respond to that?
So I just follow up on the comment I made in the chat as well. I think it still is early days, and unfortunately, predominantly the model seems to be people with money speak to cool people who know how to code, just like in the movies. But once we break out of that threshold, actually there is absolutely a role to have multi-source input into development. So foster your interest, do your due diligence, get up to speed. Yeah, as I said, I certainly don't have anywhere near the CS background, and I can't code in Python or R like Ryan and some of my colleagues do. But as long as you understand the space, understand what applications can do, then there's certainly scope to engage.
All right. So I guess if there are no final questions or comments, that is the end of our panel. Thank you guys so much for being here. Especially, first of all, thank you to the panelists for agreeing to do this and agreeing to share your awesome work with the UCLA community. And also thank you to everyone who showed up, especially the people who stayed, till the last minute. I really appreciate that you guys are here, and that also for everyone for staying calm during the Zoom bombing. I'm putting the form in the chat once again if you haven't filled it out. If you have any lingering questions, then feel free to email us at ucla.acm.ai@gmail.com. Thank you to my co-hosts, Matt and Peter, for helping me out with this panel. And yeah, I'm going to end the meeting now, but everybody have a great day. Thank you guys for showing up, and we'll see you at the next ACM AI event. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invite.
Thank you.
Thank you.